Another week, boys, and another TWAB. Man, it's good to be back. This week at Bungie, we start shaking up the sandbox. Welcome to the TWAB. We've got a lot to cover today, so I'm gonna skip the small talk and get into it. Yesterday, assistant game director and mustache enthusiast Joe Blackburn went out on Twitter and talked about some of our upcoming plans regarding Destiny 2 PvP. Please give the whole thread a read, but the TLDR, the main thing we want everyone to know is that we have a plan. It's gonna take some time, and we are excited about the future of creating a more consistent delivery of PvP content each year. By the way, guys, we did a breakdown of that entire thread. Feel free to check that out if you like, alongside 30% off on Nasty if you guys haven't tried our flavor out, but more on that later. The best of your ability. Our teams have been hard at work putting together a lot of changes for next season. We decided to break out upcoming sandbox changes into 3 parts. This week, we're covering abilities. Next week, we'll talk about armor and mods, and then we'll touch on weapons during the final week before the end of the season. Oh boy. Here's combat gameplay designer Eric Smith to give you a rundown on how your Guardians abilities will be evolving next season. So from Eric, hey Guardians, we've been hard at work on abilities balance for season 15. But before we get into the balance changes, here's some info about a quality of life change debuting in season 15. Separating melee actions. What? Is it finally happening? Have you ever tried to throw a knife at an approaching Screeb only to instead lunge forward and slap the Screeb in its gross exploding face? Have you ever accidentally wasted your hard-earned melee charge on a sad lone dreg? If so, there's hope. Introducing separate melee actions. Dude, thank God. Starting next season, you'll be able to bind your charged melee attacks and your uncharged melee attack to separate inputs, giving you greater control of when you use your abilities. This is an opt-in feature, and these new actions will be unbound by default. When you go to customize your controls, you'll see the following new entries in the action list. Auto melee is the new name for the melee action that you're used to. Your melee is context sensitive, and its behavior will change based on your equipped ability and your proximity to enemies. It usually does this job well, but will occasionally betray player intent. Charge melee is a new action that will always activate your charged melee ability upon button press, regardless of whether an enemy is in lunge range. Pressing the input when your melee ability is not fully charged will perform no action and cause the melee ability icon to flash red, similar to how your grenade ability works. Uncharged melee is a new action that will always activate your uncharged melee, even when your charged melee ability is fully charged. It's fairly straightforward, but here are some things to note. Melee attacks trigger as soon as the button is pressed, not when it's released. Melee attacks don't wait to see if you're still holding the button before starting. This means you can't set any of the melee actions to a long press or double press input. Game controllers have a limited number of inputs, so you may need to get creative with how you map your controls. Personally, I like to put my charged melee on right bumper R2 and uncharged melee on right stick click R3. This doubles up the finisher and uncharged melee actions on the right stick click R3, which will prioritize finishing enemies over meleeing them if the enemy is in a finishable state. If you assign charged melee and uncharged melee to the same input, it will always prioritize the charged melee over the uncharged melee, which is the opposite behavior of this auto melee action. To use these new actions on keyboard and mouse, open the settings menu, click on the keyboard and mouse, scroll down the charged melee and uncharged melee, and assign them to an input. To use these new actions on controller, open the settings menu, go to controller, button layout, custom, scroll down the charged melee and uncharged melee, and assign them to an input. We hope you enjoyed this new functionality, and we hope it saves your bacon from time to time. Dude, it will mine. There's so many times I just want to throw my knife at an enemy that's within range. Like, how many times have you been ready to throw your weighted knife at an enemy's face, completely lined up? They just happen to be a little too close to you, and you melee them instead. This is gonna be great. Now, moving on to long-term ability plans. Last season, Sandbox lead Kevin Yanis laid our vision for how we see subclass abilities fitting into the Destiny 2 sandbox moving forward. Our philosophy for ability design is that abilities should complement the core combat of Destiny, but not dominate it. It should enhance the game's gunplay, but not replace it. The changes we're introducing in Season 15 will help set the stage for those larger systematic ability changes. In the coming seasons, we'll be focusing on adjusting how often abilities can be used in the Crucible specifically. Please stay tuned for more info about that. Again, guys, we talked about this in a video a while back, going over everything that was mentioned in that podcast. What that really boils down to is dynamic cooldowns for your abilities, meaning it will change between PvE and PvP. Essentially, separate sandboxes, but not completely. Like, the abilities won't be completely different from how they fundamentally work from PvE to PvP, but their cooldown, as well as your lethality, could definitely be changed. Moving on, Season 15 Ability Balance Pass. For Season 15, we prepared a slew of balance changes to raise up under underperforming subclasses and tone down overperforming subclasses. Without further ado, here are the ability changes we'll be making in Season 15. So starting with general abilities, Stasis Freeze. Oh boy. The goal of these changes is to make being frozen by stasis less frustrating. Previously, players who were frozen in the air had to wait until they hit the ground to start the breakout process. Additionally, we shortened the window of vulnerability between breaking out of stasis encasement and losing damage resistance it provides, and getting back to weapon ready so you can fight back. Frozen players can now initiate breakout while airborne. We also shortened the breakout animation and camera transition. This means that once you decide to break out, you'll be able to fight back sooner. Now, there's also going to be a differentiated long freeze and short freeze visual treatment to make each status easier to identify. So essentially, neutral game abilities like grenades versus super abilities which freeze you. Now, the slide. The goal of this slide change is to slightly reduce the effectiveness of sliding into engagements to gain the upper hand. Oh boy, what is this? Is this a nerf to sliding? Even after shotgun changes we made last season, sliding into every engagement with a shotgun or any weapon is still incredibly effective, and run and gun playstyles are very low risk. This is a change that looks scarier on paper than it feels in practice in our opinion, and we'll continue to monitor how it plays out. So while sliding, players now incur the following weapon penalties: -20 stability, wow, plus 15% shotgun pellet spread, as well as a 1.5% times flinch multiplier. Okay, that's big. Maybe it is really just worse on paper. But again, this is during the slide. So when you're coming out of the slide, I'm assuming these things all go back to normal, right? Interesting though. I would argue and say this completely defeats the purpose of slide shot outside of reloading your weapon. What about the increase in stability? It just counters this? I mean, I guess that's beneficial. Overall, almost looks like Bungie's trying to slow things down. Do we have a Ghost Slow update coming? Moving on to Titans. Rally Barricade. This barricade variant doesn't see much use, so we made changes to make it a more viable option. It retains the same reload speed benefits as before, while adding other weapon buffs. Standing behind the Rally Barricade now also provides the following weapon buffs: plus 30 stability, plus 10% range, and minus 50% flinch. Yep. Okay, they're slowing things down, guys. Look, I know this is not exactly a nerf. This is definitely a buff, but don't think for 1 second I'm not going to be sitting my booty behind a barricade now. 10% more range, more stability, less flinch. Time to be Elaine and Larry. Let's go. All barricades. Currently, certain fast-moving abilities allow you to speed through an enemy barricade while taking minimum damage. Yes, it does. It pisses me off. If you can move fast enough, you can literally go right through my barricade and kill me. The goal of this change is to make players think twice before dashing through a barricade to engage the Titan on the other side. Barricades still can't cause lethal damage, but dashing through one should now always leave you with a sliver of health, so it's probably going to be immediate. Players moving at high velocity now take more damage when moving through hostile Titan barricades. Barricades now slightly protrude into the ground to better protect the Titan's feet on uneven grounds. Dude, right? I get toe shot if I'm like on an uneven surface. This should reduce instances where explosions and projectiles are able to sneak through the bottom of the barricade and hit the Titan. Well, honestly, the biggest counter to Titan barricades, at least for me right now, are glacier nades, as they'll just cause a major explosion and kill me. But I wonder if the barricade will be able to block that now. Overall, this needed to happen, guys, and I'm not just saying this from the perspective from a Titan main. I'm saying this because we know that the alternative was going to be nerfs handed out to rifts, and more specifically handed out to hunter dodge. We've seen a lot of people talk about nerfing hunter dodges. It was literally trending on Twitter. So the fact that they're going in here and actually buffing the barricades, I think that's a win-win. Moving on to Behemoth. As you may remember, midway through last season, we released a portion of the stasis related changes originally intended for this release. We're pretty happy with the effect those changes have had on the Crucible, but some of the changes we made had a negative effect on the feel of stasis and PvE content. We made some adjustments that should help those abilities feel better. In this case, the Cryoclasm change we made last season made it difficult to use Cryoclasm to shatter targets that were close to you. This change enables the Behemoth to shatter nearby targets even if they don't have enough space to get a running start. We also believe we overdid the movement speed nerf to Behemoths last season, which hurt the viability of Shiver Strike, especially during the Glacial Quake Super. We increased the movement speed to make this feel better. With this patch, we're also fixing a bug where the Whisper of Rhyme Overshield wasn't properly scaling precision damage, causing it to be significantly beefier than intended, which primarily impacted Tectonic Harvest Behemoths. So starting with Cryoclasm, while equipped, Baseline now shatters crystal and frozen enemies. We also increased duration of Screen FX notifications notifying players that Cryoclasm Long Slide is ready from 1 second to 4.5 seconds. Also, Shiver Strike increased movement speed by 25%. Whisper of Rhyme fixed a bug where the overshield provided by Whisper of Rhyme was not scaling precision damage correctly. All right, I mean, these are good changes. Movement on Behemoth right now feels terrible. Now moving on to Middle Tree Sunbreaker. Oh my god, all these buffs, dude. We're extending the throwing hammer lifespan to allow Titans more time to finish an engagement and still pick up their hammer before it vanishes. We also felt it could deal more damage against orange and yellow bar enemies. Also, the new charge melee action allows you to throw your hammer point blank at an enemy, which is pretty badass. So your throwing hammer increased time before hammer explodes after hitting the ground from 6.5 seconds to now 10 seconds. We also increased damage versus powerful PvE combatants by 50%. Honestly, now that you have a separation here of your charge and uncharged melees, things like Syntheseps are going to be easier to use with your charged melee, more specifically this throwing hammer, although I do like Worm God a lot here. And the increase there in damage getting up by 50%. Fellas, there's a lot of melee based builds. You get some 1-2 punch action in there. Oh, now moving on to top and bottom tree striker. Some of the game's melee based supers are at a bit of a disadvantage in today's sandbox, so we decided to give a few of them some love. In the future, we'll be looking at ways to reduce the disparity between melee supers and range supers in more sustainable ways. So starting with Fist of Havoc, they're going to be increasing the slam detonation radius by 14%, reduce slam damage fall off, and reduce slam attack activation costs from 21% to 18%. Whew! Alright, the bottom tree striker has already seen a resurgence, especially on console. We may be in a striker meta next season. Now moving on to middle tree striker, this change will be balanced out by something we haven't mentioned yet. We'll say more about this in a future TWAB. Alright, Inertia Override, increased duration from 4 seconds to 6 seconds. Sliding over ammo brick now grants 20% melee energy? Oh, I don't know, man. I only have one pair of pants with me today, which was obviously a mistake. Moving on to Top Tree Sentinel. The following change refers to Ward of Dawn bubble itself and not players inside the bubble. Currently, dropping a Ward of Dawn on top of a boss is a no-brainer because it's so effective. The goal of this change is to reduce the breadth of encounters solved by Ward of Dawn and make burly bubbles a conscious choice by the Titan. So Ward of Dawn increased damage taken from bosses from 0.25 to now 7 times at 0 resilience. What? Damage taken can scale down to 0.25 based on the owner's resilience stat. So the resilience is going to decide how much damage you take. Wow, that's actually incredible. And it's tied to the super. I guess Bungie was getting tired of everyone just stacking all their points in an intellect for Ward of Dawn. So now if you want to live, you need to stack things in resilience. Alrighty. And I'm assuming 0.25 would be max resilience. Now that concludes Titans. Let's talk about Hunters. Revenant. Last season, we reduced the radius of Silence Freeze. That change has played out well, requiring the Revenant to be more precise with their silence throws. Even now, silence feels like a scarier part of the super, and we want Squall to feel more dangerous. Currently, the Squall storm is slow enough that you can kind of ignore it or fight until it gets close and then relocate. With this speed change, we want players to prioritize relocating when they see an approaching Squall. Additionally, Squall will now stop when it touches a boss, which should make it better for single target boss damage. However, there's a known issue where the Squall will not start moving again if the boss moves or dies. We hope to further improve this behavior in a future release. We also feel we hit Withering Blade slightly too hard in last season's Stasis balancing. The following change should make it slightly easier to land while keeping the damage and slow duration at a reasonable spot. So starting with Silence and Squall, increase Squall movement speed by 20%. Squall Storm now stops when it touches a boss. And Withering Blade, increase projectile speed and tracking by 10%. Alright, I don't know guys, I've been using Wombo Combo with backers for the past week. Hunter still feels really good. I know the super isn't just crazy, but I definitely play this class for its neutral game. Now that they're actually speeding up the super and they're also buffing Withering Blade, I foresee many players going back to Revenant. Moving on to Middle Tree Gunslinger. Oh my god. When was the last time we talked about Blade Barrage? We like to give hunters a large window to defeat burning enemies and trigger the playing with fire perk. As such, we're giving the knife trick timer a 25% buff, increasing burn duration from 3 seconds to 4 seconds. Ah, wow, that was a tad bit anticlimactic. Moving on, Top Tree Gunslinger. The super has been through a lot. We had intentionally reduced the effective range of 6 shooters several seasons ago to balance it against Bottom Tree Golden Gun. This change was then unintentionally reverted at some point due to an unrelated integration mishap and then later de-reverted. In any case, we're extending the lethal range of the super a little to reduce how often it required 2 shots to kill in the Crucible. So 6 shooter damage fall off now starts at 25 meters instead of 20. Alrighty, I mean that's not bad guys. I know some of you wanted to get the one shot wherever, but 25 meters is still pretty good. Now, Arcstrider, as we mentioned previously, melee supers such as Arc Staff are struggling a bit in today's sandbox where players move extremely fast, weapons hit extremely hard, and ranged supers handling win duels. We've extended the duration and slam range to help alleviate some of Arc Staff's shortcomings, but we'll continue to evaluate super dynamics and search for a solution that doesn't cause power creep. Additionally, Arc Staff needed a little love in high-level PvE content, so we're increasing its damage output there. So starting with Arc Staff, extend passive super duration from 16 seconds to 20 seconds. Also increase heavy slam detonation radius from 5 meters to 6 meters. Increase damage versus PvE combatants by a whopping 33%. My god, it's about to be a Radiant Flux meta. Top tree Arcstrider. Deadly Reach, increased duration from 8 seconds to 10 seconds. No lie, that's actually really good. Also middle tree Arcstrider. Lightning Weave, dealing damage with the Tempest Strike now triggers Lightning Weave. Timer can now be extended by dealing damage with any weapon. Wow. Okay, so that's a melee ability that increases weapon reload speed. So you initiate it with a single melee, right? And as long as you're doing damage with your weapon, Lightning Weave is still procced. That's pretty good. Moving on to middle tree Night Stalker. Spectral Blades not only allows its user to go invisible and vanish from radar, but also has one of the highest damage reduction values in the game. As the fantasy of this ability is that of a stealthy assassin and not a stealthy raid boss, we decided to tone down the damage reduction. Looking at the data, middle tree Night Stalker is among the most successful subclasses in the Crucible, so this change feels warranted. So Spectral Blades reduce damage reduction during super from 52% to 47%. Also reduce additional DR when invisible from 5% to 3%. So all around, Spectral Blades should be feeling more squishy. I kind of felt like this was coming, guys, simply because I have been seeing more Spectral users, but that's actually because Revenant got a nerf. I do find that I shut down Spectral supers though, especially if they're not approaching me while invisible. This is definitely going to result in you wanting to be invisible before approaching engagements. Now moving on to Warlock, Shadebinder. Winter's Wrath is one of the best dueling supers in the game, capable of quickly and easily dispatching other supers. We're okay with that being the strength of Shadebinder in PvP, where we felt melee supers needed more of a fighting chance against the Shadebinder. So Winter's Wrath, reduce shatter pulse damage versus close range supers. Warlock must now freeze and shatter twice to defeat players in Burning Maw, Fist of Havoc, Sentinel Shield, Nova Warp, Arc Staff, or Spectral Blades. Glacier Quake still only requires one shatter to defeat. So wait, you have to freeze them, shatter, and then freeze again and then shatter again in order to get the kill? That's pretty extensive. Although Shadebinders, dude, y'all's tracking for your super, it's just nuts. We'll just have to see how this one pans out. Also, don't put that much stock into nerfs for stasis related subclasses, as there's a good chance we're gonna have fragments and aspects next season that will correct these. Now moving on to Top Tree Dawnblade. Oh my god, is it happening? Top Tree Dawnblade is straight up dominant in PvP, so we're taking some measures that make it slightly less so. Celestial Fire will now take a little more accuracy to get full damage. Having access to 2 back-to-back Icarus dashes gave this subclass too much positioning flexibility, allowing for quick, long-distance flanking and evasion. When playing against TTD, it's hard to know if they have an Icarus dash ready to go, even if you just saw them use one. We're hoping this change makes playing against a TTD more predictable. So first, we want the identity of TTD to be found in aerial combat, so we're doubling down on Heat Rises. We hope this change makes Heat Rises more accessible to players of all skill levels. So starting with Celestial Fire, reduce the tracking cone angle. Also, its arming shape, proximity detonation now shrinks over time. We also reduce detonation size by 1 meter. Damage fall off increase at short distances. Now, Icarus Dash now provides 1 air dodge every 4 seconds. While under the effects of Heat Rises, we increase to 2 dodges every 5 seconds. Interesting. And you actually move slower with Heat Rises, right, in terms of momentum. Now, Heat Rises increases duration from 10 seconds to 15 seconds. Increase the time extension awarded for air kills while Heat Rises is active. The extension duration differs based on the type of enemy killed, so minors, majors, etc. Your location now appears on enemy radar when using Heat Rises. Holy hell. I was just about to say that I thought Heat Rises was going to be absolutely meta. Now, I don't know. Again though, if you're outside of that radar radius, even though it stretches to almost the other side of the map, you're still going to get the aerial advantages, which is a huge advantage in game modes like Trials, where you spawn on either side of the map every round. I think the biggest thing here is definitely going to be Icarus Dash, only getting 1 air dodge every 4 seconds. This is probably going to make people spec more for their discipline, so they can get their grenade more, consume it, get Heat Rises more often, making Top Tree Dawnblade more of an aerial, stationary target versus a linear bat out of hell. Now moving on to Middle Tree Dawnblade. Like Ward of Dawn, dropping a well on a certain boss is a no-brainer, no-brainer because it's so effective. The goal of the below changes is to reduce the breadth of encounters solved by Well of Radiance and make Burly Wells a conscious choice by Warlocks. Additionally, we like to make Well of Radiance more effective in the Crucible. You'll have more survivability while in a well, and you won't be able to be frozen or slowed by Stasis users, making this tree a solid choice when facing off against Stasis. The Well Sword can be frozen and shatter, but it takes multiple freezes and shatters before being destroyed. Starting with Well of Radiance, guys, increased damage taken from bosses from 0.25 to 1.5. Not as much as Ward of Dawn, or not nearly as much. And it's funny, it's actually tied to resilience here. So again, giving more value to resilience. I figured they were going to tie it to recovery since it's Warlocks. Now, damage taken can scale down to 0.25 based on the owner's resilience stat. Note, this refers to Well of Radiance itself and not players inside of the well. Also, increased damage resistance buff versus enemy players from 20% to 40%. Players inside the Well of Radiance are now immune to Stasis Freeze and Slow. Well Sword can now be frozen and shattered by Stasis. Now, Guiding Flame increased duration from 7 seconds to 10 seconds. They also increased the damage buff from 20% to 25%. All right, will people start using Well of Radiance inside of Crucible? Maybe. Boots of the Assembler and other things? Go full on Lumina? I would probably give it a try. Moving on to Bottom Tree Dawn Blade. Wow, man, I haven't used that subclass since Dawn Chorus came out. This tree has felt a little lackluster when compared to Warlock's other options. So we've given it some enhanced functionality, like the Revenant Shatter Dive. Phoenix Dive can now dive down diagonally in the direction of your choosing. Oh, that just sounds nasty. Bottom Tree Dawn Blade also has one of the weaker melee attacks in the game. You had to defeat an enemy with the melee impact to cause an explosion. With this new rework, anytime you defeat an enemy who is burning or defeat an enemy with any of your solar abilities, they'll explode and put a burn on nearby enemies. Your charge melee deals 120 damage and puts a burn on the enemy, meaning you can follow up with another lethal attack and still get the explosion. As a side note, this would be even more effective with the Dawn Chorus exotic helmet. Yes, it will. And I wonder what weapons it can synergize with. Gonna have to break out old Jotun. Now, Phoenix Dive. Reduce delay before dive starts. Can now input a direction to dive in that direction. Igniting Touch. Ability rework. Solar ability kills and kills on burning targets now causes targets to explode and burn other nearby enemies, who will also explode if they die while burning. Again, the main thing that's going to really aid whether or not this is disgusting is how long the enemy actually is burning for. I would actually take less damage over a longer duration just so I can get easier procced explosions. Moving on to Middle Tree Stormcallers. Ah yes, the time has come. These changes should lead to less instances of Chaos Reach, dealing damage to enemies on the other side of a wall. Arc Beam sees high use in the Crucible, in part due to Geomax stabilizers, and is often used as a shutdown super. In future seasons, we'll be looking at Arc Beam to make sure it's not too easy to use in the Crucible. So Chaos Reach, increase beam environmental collision size to better match collision size with damage size. Reduce beam damage radius in PvP by 20%. Reduce beam in point sphere radius in PvP by 33%. By the way, again, look, I know Bungie keeps saying they don't want separate sandboxes, but look what they're doing. Look at that. You see, Bungie can do it. They're doing it. They're doing it. They're doing separation right here. Now, Bottom Tree Stormcaller. Player feedback and data on Bottom Tree Stormcaller indicated it could use a little love. Hell yeah, it can. So we made Arc Soul last a little longer and slightly shortened the time between bursts. Landfall also felt a little underwhelming, so we increased the spectacle a bit. It will now fire 5 arc projectiles along the ground in all directions, casting your super in the middle of a room to electrocute everything around you. So starting with Arc Soul, increased duration from 12 seconds to 13 seconds. Also increased fire rate by 10%. Fellas, break out your getaway artists. Electrostatic Surge now increases sprint speed when allies are near. Wow, just when they're near. And Landfall now fires 5 arc ground projectiles on cast. Fellas, depending on that radius, you might be able to just kill an entire team with a single super blast in their vicinity. Now moving on, Middle Tree Voidwalker. Ah yes, we could meme about this one all day long. Through a mix of player feedback, data, and running through some high-level PvE content, we felt that Nova Warp Super needed some attention. Buffing Nova Warp is a dangerous endeavor though, and we'll be monitoring to make sure we didn't overdo it. Wow. The last time I heard talk like this was back before Forsaken, when Chaos Reach was being talked about for the first time. In PvE, Handheld Supernova was doing a pitiful amount of damage, so we've considerably increased its damage output, especially considering the time and proximity costs you're paying to charge it up and get within range of an enemy. We also increased the hold time after charging to give you more time to throw it before it vanishes. Now, Nova Warp increased damage versus PvE combatants by 73%. No longer slows movement speed while charging. Charge now detonates on cast. Oh my god, it's a shutdown super. Handheld Supernova Increased damage versus PvE combatants by a whopping 100%. My god, if we get Oppressive Darkness back next season, this is going to be disgusting. Also increased hold time from 2.5 seconds to 3.2 seconds. Whew! We've omitted some minor changes and bug fixes from the list to avoid bogging down the TWAB any more than we already have. For the full list of ability changes, be sure to check out the patch notes when Season 15 launches. While the season's changes are focused on balancing the power output of specific abilities, we're hard at work on system level changes that will enable us to create a healthier balance between abilities and gunplay. We hope to share more about those changes in the future later. Wow, good lord, that was meaty. Fellas, so much. So many things are popping up. I've got builds on top of builds that I cannot wait to use with all these changes. Long story short, light subclasses are going to get a big mix up. Some of your favorite subclasses may no longer be your favorites, but some of the subclasses that have been sitting on the bench for well over a year or more are now about to be meta. Now moving on, improving the powering up stasis experience. With Beyond Light, Guardians received their first taste of wielding the power of darkness, as well as new ways to power up subclasses with aspects and fragments. These subclass mods introduce a new way of evolving and growing a subclass, which drastically impacts how the Stasis subclass felt. Guardians who use aspects and fragments experience the true power of stasis, whereas those who have not may feel a bit cold toward it. Even worse, many Guardians may not even know of the extended power offered by aspects and fragments, and we wanted to improve that. So starting at Season 15, our Darkness Guide on Europa, the Exo Stranger, will now reveal more information on how to complete the tasks required for earning more stasis powers. Guardians who have finished the Beyond Light campaign and visit the Exo Stranger on Europa will see the entire path for unlocking aspects and fragments. Additionally, many of the pre-requirements for obtaining and completing Born in the Darkness quests will be reduced or removed. Previously, Guardians needed to complete several quest chains and unlock Salvation's Grip before Stasis would grant them additional power. Guardians that completed the Beyond Light campaign will have immediate access to the Born in Darkness quest chain from the Exo Stranger on Europa. The Exo Stranger also reveals unowned fragments regardless of the progression through the Born in Darkness quest line, giving a preview of the many powers to unlock. With these improvements to messaging aiming at removing a lot of the mystery around powering up Stasis, we're excited to see more Guardians unlock Stasis chilling power. So many S words today, guys. I'm struggling. Now, as a final note here from Cosmo, that was a lot, right? We aren't done yet and have more in store for you next week with armor mods. Can't believe it's already August. We're in the home stretch now. Our big showcase is later this month. Can't wait to show you what's coming next. Love, Cosmo. Alrighty, guys. That is your TWAB today. Let me know in the comments below what you think. How are you feeling about this? These are major Sandbox changes that are coming almost in line with some of the changes we saw going into Forsaken, into Shadowkeep. I cannot wait to use these subclasses that I think many of us have forgotten about. Again, thank you to everyone who listened to today's TWAB. I know we had like a lisp going on here. I still got stitches all in my mouth, but much love to you for being patient. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.